Hello, so I am making this video for my car. This wasn't getting done at my house with my kids, so I was able to escape for a bit, and this is where I'm finishing this up. So hence the video, because I started to type up some of my explanations and it was just getting really, it was going to be long. So I think some of this will be easier for me to say and explain. So what you've gotten or what you've received is the document with my lesson plans, and if you're seeing this video, you saw the little link at the top to click and get my explanation a bit. So here we go. All right, so I imagine with this first one that I've got an excerpt from The House on Mango Street. There's a great excerpt from that in which the main character, Esperanza, describes like, oh, we've moved around a lot in my life, but now we're finally in this house. And it wasn't what we expected, even though, I'm happy to have a house. It wasn't what we expected. And there's a couple of paragraphs that there's great imagery describing this house. For instance, there are like the steps are tight. And the windows are so small it was like they were holding their breath. So there's great language to work with there. So hence kind of why I've come up with these language objectives and lesson objectives, because I think any student is going to need to understand imagery and inferences from that. And really with the idea of being like in this, as you'll see, it's like kind of developing a central idea, with that being like, okay, I'm using the imagery to make some inferences like that, this, about the steps, which then indicate to me that the central idea is that this house is small. This house is small. And, maybe that it's not going to be easy to navigate it, even if they're happy to be there. So that's kind of my reasoning with this. So these are it. So just to kind of go through the activities, because I'm assuming I don't need to like, you don't want the activities that I would say like, I'm going to have different goals for my L's as opposed to my students. Still not far from my lesson objectives, but with some modifications, modifying my expectations. So in here, I think it would be great. There's some great illustrations of the house on Mango Street. So I think I would just get those images and take some words directly from the passage, like those tight steps, and see if we can match like the tight steps to the illustration. Can we get like, what are these tight steps? A lot of this is gonna involve, I think, discussion. Like I'm gonna have to keep coming in and checking in and supporting and talking, what did you find? Like, let's look, what could tight steps, what does that mean? Which carries into over here. Same thing, the images are provided, but now I would hope that the student could actually find the word in the text. They wouldn't need me to provide them. They could actually like look at the text and find those words, and specifically words that indicate that the house is small. Because some of the words are just like, oh, it's a red brick house. So I would imagine that some of my entering students might just find a red brick house, and that's going to be fine. Maybe we're not getting the central idea yet, but we're getting there. Like pieces of it are there, but we're finding other things too. Here we're really honing in on, okay, we're finding the words that mean that the house is small. Further on, I would ask the student to do the highlighting themselves. I would like to, I could still maybe provide the images if I felt like they needed it. I think that would be student to student, but I would like them to highlight powerful words, not yet full sentences, of that imagery that determines that the house is small, right? Can you look at those words, like those tight steps? That's what tells you the house is small, and that you could find them yourself. Preferably without an image yet, like just using the vocab would be great if we could kind of let go of the illustration at that point. Over here, I'd bring out the story map that a lot of other students would be using. especially this is starting to get into groups. I'm trying to open my laptop a little more, sorry. Oh, I just need to scroll up. My word. Duh. It's been a long day. Okay. They be in groups so that they could also have like student support. And sometimes I really do think like peers, even at a certain point, they get more from a supportive peer than they would from me. So this is a great part. Even before, I forgot to mention there'd be a partner. So I think we really could let go of those illustrations. But over here in a group, you get a story map. Not quite a full story map because we're not doing a full plot diagram yet, but getting something that includes the word imagery with setting, characters, and plot details. And so we're now, the goal here now, starting to think I'm able to go beyond just imagery and inference. Like, this is what it means. This is the idea I get from it. But now we can think like, okay, yes, this is imagery, but this imagery is developing setting. Like I'm understanding, which is another, I think up in the language objectives, I just said kind of language related to stories. Like I'd have to then go in, okay, we might need to know setting at this point. So I realized that the language objectives, the language needs might change depending on the student that's there. I didn't include all of them up there, but I'm aware of that. And, but we could start to play around with this idea that imagery creates setting. Like that's a piece of what makes this setting. So that's what would go there. We learn about characters in this way. I mean, with the character describing the house in this way, like who is she and what are we getting from that in her descriptions. Probably wouldn't get too deep into like perspective yet and how is this, maybe this, we're seeing this through the eyes of a young girl. We probably wouldn't get there yet, but interesting to think about. You just never know. You never know where this could go. And plot details, other details that are included in it. In this passage, she does also indicate we've moved from here and then we moved from there and we moved from there. So I think even the build-up, it could be interesting to note the build-up of like, even though this house is small, she's happy to be there. So we could even build on that central idea because it does say related ideas in there. So I think this is a great chance to build on that it's that adding that extra bit, not just that the house is small, but like, even though the house is small, she's still happy to be there. She's happy to have a place to call her own and to not have the other hassles that come with moving. So you could even kind of expand and get into other aspects of the text and expand on the central idea. And the ability to then use full sentences and not just words. Like we can actually identify like, okay, all these sentences are giving me this idea. And finally with this last one, we're bridging, because that's how I have it all at the top there. Would be taking, I think, look, now we're in a small group. We stay in that, maybe I imagine that we'd stay in that small group. And now student work is just getting passed around. In general, we would just move student work around. And then the English learner, along with their peers, can review all the different samples and have, I think at this point, can have a discussion about maybe what they notice in each, what each example, the strengths are, what maybe it's lacking. And then as a group, they can determine and explain to me why they chose which one was best. So that's that lesson. On to this one. I think this one's maybe a little more straightforward. I'm going to be using the short story Charles. I love that short story, and kids like it too in middle school. It's really goofy. But actually it lends itself to these standards really well. So we're aiming to do a plot diagram and a summary, all students. Like we're going to be getting a plot diagram and then a full summary, almost like a book report, I guess we could call it. We're going to need to know some terms here. I'm sure some other academic terms are going to come up as always, but these are the beginnings. So to begin with this story, in this story, this boy comes home from school and tells his parents, oh, you'll never guess what Charles did at school today. There's a boy named Charles and he's causing trouble. And every day, like, they'll say the next day, I forget the main characters for the little boy who's telling all this. I forget, that's terrible. But he is telling his mom, like, oh, you'll never guess what Charles did today. So it's great. It goes on like that for some time until, we realize that the main character actually is Charles, and he's been talking about him like he's another kid so he doesn't get in trouble. So it's a great story for lending itself to sequence. So I would initially, while other students could get the story and work within the story, for a oops, oh my goodness, I just lost it, sorry, oh no. For an entering L, I would, on a separate piece of paper, I would have pulled the parts of the story that are just what Charles did, so that we could have Charles did this. Oh, you'll never guess what Charles did next. Oh, today Charles did this, and then he did that. So they can see that together, and not those other details like, wow, mom thought this Charles certainly is trouble. Those details could really throw them off. So they could just have a separate piece of paper that really we just see the things that Charles did. And then he did this, then he did that. Before that, it was this, then it was next, next, finally, and all those sequence words. I could also provide illustrations. The story itself is not illustrated, but I could easily find illustrations for this short story to indicate like the bad behavior that Charles was exhibiting, like taking toys, not sharing. Those are great images for this. And I think the criteria would then to be like march each thing that Charles does using the simplified story with the illustration, with the words, with the sequence words. Then on to emerging. I think we still need that piece of paper that just details just what Charles did with the illustration. So I think I'd give that same scaffold. But now I think the student would be more capable of writing phrases and not just single sequence words. We could get maybe longer phrases explaining. Over in developing, I think we're ready to tackle the plot diagram at this point. It would be a modified plot diagram. I would number the boxes so that they could see the order in which things need to go. I would not want to give them the sequence words. I think at this point, they can compose the sequence. They can compose sentences. They can find the sequence, but maybe to help them along, like numbering the boxes so that they can figure out, oh, this is what a plot diagram does. And yeah, I think the ability then would be to write sentences within the plot diagram boxes, just like with the others would be doing also. The numbers would just be a guide as to the order this would have to go. And over here, right, expanding. Expanding would be now paragraph. I would need to put together a graphic organizer. I would imagine at this point, like, the student would have still, like, if it was an expanding student from the get-go, they could have maybe just done the plot diagram with no supports, but they would have their plot diagram as an extra support here for them. So they could use that plot diagram, what they've already planned, and then they'd have this graphic organizer to help keep this paragraph clear. I wouldn't want to give sequence words, but I would probably come up with some sort of indications at certain parts to maybe consider putting a word here. There's ways, like I could like get a paper. This organizer could maybe be like different boxes that would be like, first you do this, then that, and now you put all these boxes together to make a paragraph. So I'd have to see. I think, again, it would just depend on this particular student and what I thought, like how much support needs to be on this graphic organizer. But I do think a graphic organizer is a way to go to help build a paragraph. And then, yeah, I think the success criteria is just, can they independently do it then? Do they still need my support, or can they independently fill in that graphic organizer? Bridging would then be they get that, now they've got their plot diagram, they've got their graphic organizer, but now it's going to be a graphic organizer for multiple paragraphs. Let me get this out of the way, that bubble there. So I don't think it's too far off the first one, but now we're talking multiple paragraphs. So we really might even need some sentence starters at this point, perhaps, not necessarily giving away the sequence or academic or technical language, but just helping with transitions, maybe like students can struggle with transitional words. So maybe even like, okay, how do we transition from thought to thought at that point? And I think that criteria would then be, can they take what they've put, this kind of rough draft, so to speak, can they type it all up, revise their work, and get me a final draft? So that is my idea. Hopefully the explanation helped support this, because I just wasn't, it was a lot to try to type. I mean, I've been talking for like 15 minutes, so that was going to be a lot to type out, and I figured it'd be easier to just explain what my lesson activities were. And as far as classroom layout, that's the one thing I didn't put on here either. I think because a lot of this is like, I have to be prepared for partners in small groups, and how I run my classroom anyway, I don't know if I'm dark here, is I have clusters of desks. I have very flexible seating. So I have like curved tables, I have high top tables, I've got circular tables, and like I even have a few spinny chairs. So that's kind of, I keep my classroom cozy. I've got like twinkle lights. I have lamps that I can turn off my fluorescent overheads. And I try to keep it a really peaceful, calm, comfortable, safe environment, with flexible seating and end groups, so that even if there's, you know, an L who is entering or emerging and they're working a little more independently, like, who says they can't turn to a peer next to them and get some help? Because especially in middle school, it's such an important time to form friendships, and they care a lot more about what their peers say than adults at this age. So I think that that's also important for my classroom, to create that collaborative space. So that's what I'm thinking there. And now I think I covered all the bits of this, and the only thing I need to add that I didn't yet is the reflections that'll be at the bottom of this page when I do that. So yes, thank you.